Right, so good morning to everyone. So let's continue our lectures and let's continue from where we left off last time. Okay, so before the exam, right, we were just covering this question of decidability of languages, right? So we have defined this notion of Turing machine, right? So we said that Turing machine is the most powerful computing abstraction, right? And we sort of demonstrated this, right? We sort of demonstrated this by showing that languages which are accepted by Turing machines, right? So they include languages which are not, for example, contextual languages, and then we showed that if you so a Turing machine that has an infinite tape, right, and a read head which can traverse the tape in any direction, right. But if you add any more computing power, right, to this Turing machine, like let's say in the form of non-determinism or multiple tapes and so on, then that doesn't really increase the language recognition capability of the Turing machine, right? And then we showed that I left this as a reading exercise, right? That even real computers can be simulated by Turing machine, right? So we have some sort of idea, right? That a Turing machine is a very powerful computing abstraction, right? So then the question that we are asking is, are there languages which are not accepted by Turing machines, right? Or which cannot be recognized by Turing machines, right? So languages which are recognized by Turing machines are called recursively enumerable languages. So we are interested in languages which are not recursively enumerable, right? So in the last lecture, we demonstrated this language LD, right, which is the diagonalization language. So this language LD, right, is not recursively enumerable, right? So it's outside the set of recursively enumerable languages, which means that there is no Turing machine that can identify this LD, right? So let's just quickly revise what this LD was, right? So this LD, right, is so the crucial observation in defining LD is that a Turing machine, right, can be encoded as a binary string, right? So there's a very straightforward encoding, right, where so Turing machine is just a set of transitions, right, and every transition has 5 components, right? So there is the input state, the output state, the input symbol, the output symbol, and then the direction in which the head needs to be moved, right? So this can be encoded in binary in a very straightforward fashion, and then the encoding of the Turing machine itself is just the concatenating the encoding of all the transitions. So the upshot is that a Turing machine can be represented as a binary string, right? So now this language LD, right, is nothing but so it's basically the encodings of Turing machines, right? So it's the encoding of Turing machines. So it's all those encodings W, right, such that W does not belong to language of M of W. So what this means is that if so, let's say that you treat some binary string W as an encoding of the Turing machine, right? So this W defines a Turing machine. You consider its language, and then you ask, right, whether or not this encoding itself, right, this W is in the language of the Turing machine or not, right? Uh, and if it is not, right, then this particular string is present in LD, right? Otherwise, it's not present in LD, right? So this language is not recursively enumerable, right? And the way to show it, right, is that we show it by contradiction, right? So let's assume, so let's suppose that there was some Turing machine, right? Let's say M, which accepted this language, right? So let's say that L of M was equal to LD. Okay. So now this Turing machine M, right, is going to have some encoding, right? So let's say that X is the encoding of this Turing machine M. So which means that this MX, right, is the same as M. So X is the encoding, the binary encoding of the Turing machine M. So which means that MX, right, which is the Turing machine whose encoding is X, right, is the same as M. So now we can show a contradiction, right? Because we can ask, right, whether or not X belongs to the language of M of X, or X does not belong to the language of M of X, right? So let's say that X belongs to the language of M of X. So then, what can you say about so what can you say about X then, right? So since X belongs to the language of M of X, this means that X cannot belong to LD, right? Because we said that LD is the set of all Turing machines which don't accept their own encodings, right? So since this MX is accepting its own encoding, which means that X cannot belong to LD. But we said that LD is the same as this language of M, right? Which is the same as language of M of X. So this would imply that L belongs to the language of M of X. So this is rather X does not belong to the language of X, because LD is the same as the language of M, which is the same as language of MX, right? So this is a contradiction, right? Because from the fact that X belongs to language of M of X, I have derived that X does not belong to the language of M of X, right? So yeah, so that's why there cannot exist a Turing machine M which accepts this diagonalization language, right? So hence the LD is not recursively enumerable. Okay. So so are there any questions so far? So Vineet is asking, how can we say if RE accepts a string or not? So we are not saying that RE accepts. So an RE is a recursively enumerable language, right? So which means that it will have some Turing machine which defines that language, right? So we are considering the encodings of all those Turing machines, right? So the LD language, right, is the language of Turing machines, right? So it's basically the language of Turing machines. So when it's asking not here, but in general.
So like we say, recursively enumerable language, they can never halt. Like, even that is not accepted. But if we are like processing a string on the Turing machine, how
Mhm.
can we know if it will never halt or if it will halt after some time and get accepted? Like we can't differentiate between the two.
Yeah, so that's correct. So that's why recursively enumerable languages are not useful in practice, right? So in the sense that we need recursive languages which are guaranteed to halt, irrespective of whether the Turing machine accepts them or not.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's why the set of recursive languages, right, are called decidable. Right? While everything that is not recursive, right, but may be potentially recursively enumerable, is undecidable. Right? So in fact, these languages here, right, so which are recursively enumerable but which are not recursive, so they are called semi-decidable. Right? But in general, right, anything that's outside this set of decidable problems is called undecidable. So yeah. So in today's lecture, we will see whether or not there are languages which are semi-decidable, which means that which are recursively enumerable but which are not recursive. So we have used so this language is right. So this language LD in particular is very abstract, right? Because it's saying something. So its strings, right, are nothing but Turing machines, right? It's encode its strings or the languages. So that the string in this language is simply an encoding of a Turing machine, right? So it's not very useful, right? Because Turing machines themselves are abstract representations of real-world computing machines. So from the fact, right, that okay, I have this language LD which is undecidable, right? It's a very abstract language, right? Because no one really cares about whether or not there are Turing machines which don't accept their own encodings, right? So it's not really very useful. So the fact that LD is undecidable is interesting intellectually, but it doesn't really impact the real world directly. So in today's lecture, right? In fact, in the next lecture as well, we will develop some Turing machine related problems only that are undecidable, right? So we look at some more problems which are undecidable, but they are still related to the Turing machines, right? In the sense that the strings of the languages will still be encodings of Turing machines, right? But our ultimate goal is to show is to basically use this theory to show that some real problems are undecidable as well, right? So in the next lecture, in fact, we'll see this technique called reduction, right? And with the help of reduction, we can show how some real world problems are also undecidable. So here are some real world examples, right, of undecidable problems, right? So the first problem is a very crucial problem. Right? So in fact, this is the problem of program verification, right? So can a C program produce an error on some input, right? So let's say that I want to build a verifier, right, for programs, right? So I want to build this program which takes as input other C programs, for example, and it basically decides this question, right, that whether or not this program will produce an error on some input, right, where the error could be either an error message, right, or it could be say a segmentation fault or anything like that, right? So this problem is undecidable, right? Which means that there is no program which can do this. Similarly, we have seen this example regarding context-free grammars as already, right? So is a given context-free grammar ambiguous? This is also an undecidable problem, and to two given context-free grammars generate the same language. So this is also an undecidable problem. So we have seen that, for example, for regular languages, right, I can determine, right, that whether or not two DFAs, right, whether or not two DFAs generate the same language, but we can't do this for CFGs. So we will see later, right, how we can show some of these real-world problems are undecidable. But first, let us look at this language, right, which is recursively enumerable but not recursive. It's a semi-decidable language. This is the universal language. So an example of a recursively enumerable but not recursive language is the language LU of a universal Turing machine. So first we will define what is this universal Turing machine, right? And then we will look at its language LU, right? So this universal Turing machine basically simulates any other Turing machine, right? So this UTM takes as input the binary encoding of some TMM, and it takes some binary string W, and then so this UTM would accept this M and W if and only if M accepts W. So the language of this UTM, right, is basically the concatenation, right, of the encoding of some Turing machine M and some binary string W, right? And then this UTM determines whether or not this W is present in the language of M. So this UTM will accept if and only if W is present in the language of M, right? So if and only if M accepts W. So this UTM can be designed, right, in a very straightforward fashion, right? So in order to show that this universal language, right, in fact is recursively enumerable, we will design the universal Turing machine, right? So remember that the input to the universal Turing machine is are two things, right? So there is the encoding of the Turing machine M and some binary string W, right? And we want to find out whether or not W is present in the language of M, right? So this is any arbitrary Turing machine M, right? So what this UTM does, right, is that it simply simulates M or W, right? So inputs are of the form the binary code, the binary encoding for M, and then this the separator, which is 111, and then the binary string W. So remember that this binary encoding of M, right, this ensures that there cannot be 3 consecutive ones, right, in the encoding, right? Because we designed this encoding, right, to be of the form some 0i11, 0j11, 0k11, and so on, right? So that's why, so where these all are the transitions of the Turing machine, and they are separated by the symbol. So they are separated by the sequence 1 1. Right? So that's why 3 consecutive ones cannot be present. So a valid TM code never has 1 1 1, and so we can split M from W. Right? So this is the input to the universal Turing machine, and the way that we want to design this UTM is that it must accept its input if and only if M is a valid Turing machine code, and this Turing machine accepts W. So here, right, in order to design this UTM, we will take advantage of this multiple extensions that we discussed earlier, right? So we said that a Turing machine can have multiple tapes in particular, right, where each tape has its own separate read head, and this can be simulated in turn by a Turing machine with a single tape, right? So that's why we can allow this extra computational power to a Turing machine, right? So we will use this extra computational ability, right, which is that, so this UTM will have several tapes. So in fact, it will have 3 tapes. So the first tape is going to hold the input, right, which is the encoding of the machine M, which this UTM wants to simulate, along with 111, and then the word W with the binary string W. So the tape 2 is going to simulate the tape of M itself, right? So M is going to have its own tape, right, which is going to be tape 2, and we are going to mark the current head position of M to be the head position on the tape 2 of the UTM. And the third tape will hold the state of M. So it will just contain the state of M. So let's see how the UTM functions, right? So in the very first step, the UTM will check that M is a valid code for a TM, right? So remember that so there are three tapes here, right? So this is tape 1, this is tape 2, right? And this is tape 3. And on the tape 1, I have the encoding of M, right? And then I have 1 1 1, and then I have W. This tape 2 is going to be the tape for M itself, right? So this is the tape for M, and this tape 3 is going to contain the current state of M. Right? So in the very first step, the UTM will check whether or not M is a valid code for a TM. So this means that the UTM will check all the necessary constraints, right, for this given code M to be a valid code, right? It's just that all the moves should have, all the transitions should have 5 components, and no 2 transitions should have the same state or symbol as the first 2 component, right? Because we say we constrain this M to be deterministic, right? So the Turing machines are all deterministic. So that's why these are the constraints that the UTM will first check, right, in order to make sure that M is a valid code, right? So if M is not a valid code, then we defined we said that if the binary encoding is not valid, right, then we will consider a fixed TM which doesn't accept anything, right? So that's why in this case the UTM will also consider that fixed Turing machine which doesn't accept anything, so it will simply halt. So if M is not valid, then its language is empty, and so the UTM halts immediately without accepting. So if M is valid, right, then it's now going to start simulating the actions of M. So to do that, it will first initialize the second tape, right? Remember, which was the tape for the Turing machine M, to represent the tape of M with the input W, and then it initializes the tape 3 to hold the start state of M. Okay. So the tape of M, right, which is this tape 2, will be initialized with the word W, right, which is there on the first tape. So we'll just copy this W from the first tape to the second tape, right? And then we will copy the start state of M to the tape 3, okay, to tape 3. So note that this Turing machine M, right, which is the input to this UTM, may have a different alphabet, right, than the UTM M itself, right? So which means that every tape symbol, right, or even the input symbol of M may require multiple tape squares in U, right? But that is fine, right, because any alphabet, right, can be encoded in binary, right? So we basically consider the binary encoding of the alphabet of M, right? But this would mean that in a single transition of M, right, we may have to make multiple transitions of U, right? Because we may have to cover multiple tape squares of U in order to find out, for example, what is the tape symbol under the read head, right? Or what is the new tape symbol that needs to be written. But it will still be a finite number, right? So we can do this. And now once we have initialized the input word, right, or the input string on the tape 2, right, and the state, the start state on tape 3, I can now simulate the actions of M, right? So what I do is I look at the current state which is on tape 3, and then I look at the current tape symbol which is under the read head on tape 2. So based on both of this, I now look for the corresponding move on tape 1, right? So tape 1 contains all the transitions of M, right? So depending on the current state, so I basically search for the current state and the current tape symbol under the read head, right, on tape 1, and whenever I find the corresponding move, right? So if I don't find anything, then I'll simply halt. But if I do find a move, right, then so that move will involve a state change. It will involve a change of the current of basically the symbol, right, which is present under the read head on tape 2, and it will involve changing the direction, right, So it will basically involve moving the read head on tape 2, right, by one square either to the left or the right. It's all of these steps will be simulated by the UTM. So if the UTM finds a transition for the current state and the current symbol, then it will change the symbol and will move the head marker on tape 2, depending upon what was the transition that was read on tape 1, and it will also change the state on tape 3. Okay. So in this way, it can simulate every move of M on the input W, right? And if at some point, right, if M enters an accepting state, right, or final state, then this UTM will also accept. So it will also move to a final state and it will halt, right? On the other hand, as I said, right, if M halts, right, because uh, there is no transition, right, out of some state and symbol, right, and if M is not in a final state, then this UTM will also halt in a non-final state, right? And if M is in a loop, right, so if it goes on forever, then this UTM will also go forever, right? So it just simulates M on W. So note that now, right, we have designed this UTM such that its language, right, is going to be exactly all those strings of the form. Sorry. So its language is going to be strings of the form M11W, right, such that W belongs to L of M. Because if W belongs to L of M, right, then during the simulation of M, we will enter so during the simulation of M, right, we will enter a final state of M, which means we'll also enter a final state of this UTM, which means we will accept this M11W. But if W is not there in L of M, right, then either it accepts, then either it halts on a non-final state, in which case the UTM will also halt in a non-final state, or it goes on forever, right, in which case the UTM will also go on forever. So that's why its language is essentially LU itself. Okay. So any questions regarding this construction of the UTM? Okay. So this LU, right, which is the language of the UTM, so this is clearly recursively enumerable because we have just designed a Turing machine for LU. Right? But we will show that it is not recursive. So in order to prove that it is not recursive, we will again use a proof by contradiction. Right? So we will use the fact that this language LD, right, which is the diagonalization language, is not recursively enumerable. Right? So we'll show that if LU, right, were to be recursive, then LD, right, so then we can design a Turing machine for LD. So in fact, we can design a total Turing machine for LD, right, which means we will be able to show that LD itself is recursive, which is then a contradiction. Right? So let's see that proof, right? So let's assume that LU were recursive. Right? So if LU is recursive, then it means that there exists some Turing machine, right? So let's say this Turing machine is U, whose language is the same as LU, right? And this Turing machine is total, right? Which means it always halts. So then using this Turing machine U, right? So the language of U is LU. This is what we are assuming, right? And we are assuming that this Turing machine U is an algorithm, right? Which means it is total, it always halts on all inputs. So then we can design an algorithm for LD, right? So we are saying we'll design an algorithm, right? What we mean by this is that we'll design a Turing machine which is total. So this Turing machine is very straightforward, right? So this new Turing machine that we're designing, right? It takes as input some word W, right? Some string W, right? And then in order to decide if this string W is present in LD, right, we will follow these three steps, right? So first we check whether or not W is a valid Turing machine code. Okay? So this can be done in a very straightforward fashion, right? And if W is not a valid TM code, right, then we know that its language is empty. That's the convention that we have followed, which means that W is in LD, right? Because LD is the set of all encodings of Turing machines whose language, right, doesn't contain the encoding itself, right? So since this language of W, right, or the language of M of W is empty, it is definitely W itself is not present, right? So that's why W is present in LD. Okay. On the other hand, if it is a valid TM code, right, then we will basically use right, the Turing machine U here. So we will simulate the Turing machine U. So when we say use the hypothetical algorithm, right, we are basically simulating U. So we simulate U, right, and to U we give this input string, right, which is W111W. So so U will check whether or not W111W is present in LU or not. So this means that it essentially checks whether or not this W is present in the language of M of W, right? Because that's what LU is, right? So LU is the set of all strings of the form let's say M111W, right, such that W is present in the language of M, right? So here W itself is also the encoding of the Turing machine, right? So therefore we check whether or not W is present in L of M of W, right? Since this particular Turing machine U, right, is total, right, it's an algorithm, which means it will always return, right? So either it will say that yes, W is in L of MW, right? In which case we won't say so we will say that W is not in L of B, right? But if it says that W is not in L of M L of MW, then we will say that W is in LD, right? So let me just write that down, right? So basically in step 2, right, we simulate this U on W11W, right? So we'll get either two outcomes, right? So either U will halt in an accepting state, okay, or in a final state. So in which case it will say that W belongs to language of MW. In which case we will say that W is not in L of B. So we'll basically halt, but in a non-accepting state. And or it will say that W does not belong to L of MW. In which case we will halt in a accepting state. Right? So we'll say that W belongs to L of D. Okay. So the language of this hypothetical Turing machine, right, this particular Turing machine that we have just designed, right, using the hypothetical Turing machine for LU, right. So its language, so the language of this Turing machine is nothing but the diagonalization language, right, LD. And moreover, this Turing machine also halts, right, on all inputs. So essentially, we have shown that LD is recursive, right? But this is contradicting the fact that earlier we showed that LD is not even recursively enumerable. Right? So that's why there cannot exist. So which means that our initial assumption, right, that there exists this hypothetical algorithm for LU is false, right? So therefore, LU is not recursive. Because if it is recursive, then we can basically design a recursive. We can basically design a total Turing machine for LD. So are there any questions regarding this step? Okay. Yeah, so this is simply repeating what I said earlier, right? That so we know that there is no algorithm for LD, but therefore our assumption that there is an algorithm for LU is wrong. So LU is recursively enumerable, but it is not recursive. So if you look back again, right, at this picture, then so then this language LU, right, is basically going to come here, right? Because it is recursively enumerable, but it is not recursive, right? So this is still an undecidable problem, right? So in fact, this is a semi-decidable problem. So let's look at some more undecidable problems. So first of all, right, let's again take a look at this language of the universal Turing machine, which is LU. So this is M11X such that X belongs to L of M. And so this problem is also called the membership problem. So another important non-recursive but recursively enumerable problem is the halting problem. Right? So this problem is as follows. Right? So this halting problem is also recursively enumerable, right? But it is not recursive, which means it is undecidable. So this halting problem LH is defined as follows, right? So it is basically the set of all strings of the form M11X such that M halts on X. Right? So it basically consists of this binary encodings of m, right? And along with this some string x, right? And it accepts m11x if and only if m halts on x, irrespective of whether m accepts or rejects, right? So if m halts on x, then this m11x is present in L of h. So this language, this halting problem, is clearly recursively enumerable, right? Because I can basically just use the universal Turing machine itself, right? So the universal Turing machine, right, I can consider a variant of the universal Turing machine, right, which on its input m11x, right, would basically simulate m, right, on x, right? So to first check whether or not m is a valid TM code, right, and so on, right? So if it is not a valid TM code, then it will definitely say that it's going to halt, because then this is the fixed TM which doesn't accept anything. So if m is a valid TM code, then it will simulate m on x, right? And then it can find out, right? Because so if m, right, halts on x, right, either in an accepting state or in a non-accepting state, then this Turing machine is then this new Turing machine that we're designing, right, is also going to halt, but in an accepting state, right? But on the other hand, if m does not halt on x, right, then this Turing machine, this universal Turing machine that we're designing, will also not halt on x. But that is fine, right? Because in such a case, it will not it won't be present in the language L of h. So when he's asking that how can it find if it halts or not? Yeah. So as I said, right? So a recursively enumerable language, right? Uh, so here the Turing machine only needs to halt if the input string is present in the language. Right? So if so if the input, like let's say m11x is present in the language, right, it means that m is definitely going to halt on x, right? So in that case, during our simulation as well, right, we will find that m halts on x, and therefore this UTM will also halt. But if the input string is not in the language, right, which means m does not halt on x, then during our simulation as well, right, we won't halt. But that is fine, right, because we are not obligated to halt in that case anyway. So that's why this language is recursively enumerable. So let's prove that this language is not recursive. So in order to show that this language is not recursive, what we will do, right, is, so here I mean, so the strategy that we'll use is very similar to the strategy that we used earlier, right? But it is slightly different, right? So this is motivated, this particular proof methodology, right, is motivated towards this concept of reduction, right, that we will see in the next lecture. So let's see how this proof goes, right? So let's assume that this halting problem is recursive, right? So we want to show that it's not recursive, but for the sake of contradiction, we will assume that it is recursive, which means that there is this total Turing machine n, right? So there is some way in which, right, someone has been able to come up with this total Turing machine m, this total Turing machine n rather, whose language L of n is the same as LH. Okay? So we will show how we can use this n to basically solve the membership problem, right? So in particular, right, when we say solve, we'll decide the membership problem, right? So we will use n to decide the membership problem. And that would be the contradiction, right? So let's see how we will do that, right? So so given m and x, right? Right. So remember that the membership problem, right? So what is the membership problem? So this is this language LU, right, of the form m11x, such that x belongs to L of m. Okay. So so we want to design a Turing machine for this membership problem, right? So what we'll do is as follows, right? So given this m and x, right, let's say that we construct another Turing machine m prime, and then this Turing machine m prime behaves as follows, right? So so this Turing machine m prime has its own input y. Okay? So on its input y, okay, it's first going to simulate this m on y, right? So remember, m is the input, so m and x are the input to the membership problem, right? So m prime on its input y first simulates m on y. Okay, if m accepts y, then m prime is going to halt. On the other hand, if m holds, right, and rejects y, then m prime is going to enter an infinite loop. Okay. Uh, so this is this new Turing machine m prime that we have designed, right? So m prime on its input y is first going to simulate m on y, and if m accepts y, then m prime is going to halt, and if m halts, right, and but it rejects y, then m prime is going to enter an infinite loop. So now, right, you can see that if some x, right, is present in the language of m, right, then it means that m prime is also going to then m prime is guaranteed to halt on x, right? So since we are based, so this m prime, right, is basically simulating m on its input, right? So which means that if x is present in the language of m, right, then m prime is definitely going to halt, right, because m itself is going to halt. Okay. So in which case m prime will definitely halt on x. Right? On the other hand, if x, right, is not present in the language of m, right, which means that so if x is not present in the language of m, there are two possibilities, right? So either m halts on x, right, but it halts in a non-final state, right? So in this case, if m halts and rejects its input, right, then m prime enters an infinite loop, right? So in which case m prime definitely does not halt, right? On the other hand, if m itself does not halt on x, then m prime will also not halt on x. So in which case, which means that if x is present in the language of m, right, then m prime definitely halts on x, and if x is not present in the language of m, then m prime definitely does not halt on x, right? Because we have taken care of both the cases, right? So if x is not present in the language of m, then either m does not halt on x or m halts in a non-final state, right? And in either of these two cases, m prime is not going to halt on x. So now this means that this tm m prime, right, basically functions just like m, right? But we can now give this tm m prime to as input to the tm n, right? So remember that we have this hypothetical tm n which decided the halting problem, right? So we can then run n on m prime 11x. Right? So now if n says that m prime 11x does halt, right? So in that case, I can definitely say that x belongs to the language of m. Right? On the other hand, if n says that m prime does not halt on 11x, m prime does not halt on x, then that definitely means that this x does not belong to the language of m. Right? So which means that I can run this total Turing machine n, right, which is hypothetical total Turing machine n, which solves the halting problem, right? And I can use this n to also decide the membership problem. So this would imply that the membership problem is recursive, but that is a contradiction, okay? Because we showed that this LU is not recursive, right? It's basically recursively enumerable. So this means that there cannot be this hypothetical Turing machine n, right, which can decide the halting problem. Okay. So are there any questions regarding this construction? So what we have done, right, is that we have basically said, right, that okay, given an instance of the membership problem, right, I have come up with another instance of the halting problem, right, such that this instance of the membership problem, right, is present in the language LU if and only if this instance of the halting problem is present in the language LH. So we have said that okay, if some particular string x, right, is present in L of m, which means that this m11x is present in the is present in L of m, right, is present in LM, right, or in LU rather, then m prime is going to halt on x, right? Which means that this instance of the halting problem, which is m prime 11x, is going to be present in LH. And that means that if I can design a Turing machine, a total Turing machine for the halting problem, then I can also design a total Turing machine for the membership problem. Okay. Uh, so let's continue. Okay, so another undecidable problem, right, is the complement of the halting problem. So what's the complement of the halting problem, right? So this is nothing but so this L, H, and its complement, right? So LH is the halting problem, and its complement is basically all the strings which are not present in LH, right? So this will basically be the set of all strings of the form M11X such that M does not halt on X. Okay. So this problem, right, is not only not recursive, right, but it is not even recursively enumerable, uh, which means that there doesn't exist even any Turing machine which can define this particular language. So in general, right, I mean, we can prove this using this general observation or this general sort of lemma, right, which says that if some language L, right, so if some arbitrary language L is non-recursive, recursively enumerable, right, which is just like the halting problem, right? So we said this halting problem is non-recursive, but it is recursively enumerable, right? Then its complement LC cannot be recursively enumerable. Okay. Uh, so the reason is that let's say that this language L, right, is recursively enumerable, right, which means that I can design a Turing machine which is going to halt, which is guaranteed to halt on all the strings which are present in L. Now let's say that this language L complement, right, is also recursively enumerable, right? So if this L complement were to be recursively enumerable, then this means that there is this Turing machine, right? This hypothetical Turing machine whose language will be L complement, right? So which means that on the strings which are present in L complement, it is guaranteed to halt, right? So now I can run both of this Turing machines for L and L complement in parallel, right? So given some string, right, let's say X, right, either X belongs to L or X does not belong to L, right? So if X belongs to L, then this Turing machine for L will halt, right? But if X does not belong to L, then the Turing machine for L complement will definitely halt. So on the string X, right, I will design this new Turing machine which will basically run the TMs for both L and L complement in parallel. When we say in parallel, right, this means that I will have two tapes, right, both with independent heads, right, where let's say the tape 1 will be the tape for L, for the Turing machine for L, and the tape 2 will be the Turing machine for the complement of L, right? So they will have independent read heads, and then basically we will basically simulate the Turing machines for L and L complement on the two tapes, okay, in parallel. And since X will definitely be either in L or in L complement, one of these two Turing machines will definitely halt, which means that which basically means that this Turing machine, yeah, right, will also halt, right? So now I can use this as a total Turing machine for L, right? So for example, I can say that while simulating L, right, if I find that that particular simulation halts, right, then that means that the string X is present in L, right? Therefore I will move to a final state. On the other hand, if I find that the simulation for L complement halts, right, which means that X is not present in L, X is present in L complement, then I'm going to move to a non-final state and I will also halt. Right? So now I can build this total Turing machine for L. Okay. Uh, but that would mean that L itself is recursive, right? But we have started with the assumption that L is non-recursive, recursively enumerable. So this means that our initial assumption that L complement is recursively enumerable is wrong. Right? So that's why L complement cannot be recursively enumerable. Right? So using this general observation, we can sort of prove that this complement of the halting problem is not recursively enumerable. Right? So in fact, the complement of any non-recursive recursively enumerable language is not recursively enumerable. So yeah, so that's the reason. So that's why this complement of the halting problem is also undecidable. So any questions so far? Okay. So let's move to the next topic then. So I'll just briefly introduce the next topic. We have 5 minutes. Okay. So here, so we will look at more undecidable problems, right? In particular, we will look at this very important theorem, right? It's called Rice's theorem. Right? So Rice's theorem says that undecidability is the rule, right? It's not the exception, which basically means that there are many problems, right, which are undecidable. Right? So in fact, saying anything about the language of a Turing machine is undecidable, right? And that's what Rice's theorem says, right? That deciding whether the language of a Turing machine has any meaningful property cannot be done. So we will see what we mean, right, when we say language has a property. Right? What do we mean when we say that? But Rice's theorem has major practical implications in the areas of compiler, program analysis, and verification. So in particular, one of the consequences of Rice's theorem is that we cannot write programs to verify the correctness of other programs, right? So this problem verification is basically undecided. So let's look at what do we mean when we say property of a language. So let's say language. So we know the language, right, is a set of strings. So let's consider sets of languages, right? So a set of languages is basically a property of languages. So this is basically a collection of languages. So for example, right, here is a property, right? So infiniteness is a property, right? So if you take any language, right, it's either infinite or it is not infinite. Okay? So now if you consider the set of all infinite languages, right, then this becomes the infiniteness property. So the infiniteness property defines this set of languages, which is nothing but the set of all infinite languages. Right? So another way to look at a property is basically a binary function. It's a binary function p from languages, right, to either yes or no. Right? So given a language, right, you ask, right, whether or not this language has the property or not. So basically you will get either yes or you will get a no. So all of those languages for which you get a yes, right? So these are the languages which are present in the set of languages, right, which have the property. Right? While those languages for which you get the answer no, they are not present in the set of languages corresponding to that property. Right? So you can ask. So other examples are, for example, so there is the emptiness property, right, which is that is a language empty or not. Right? There are properties like regular languages, context-free languages. So you can ask whether or not some language is regular, some language is context-free, and so on. Right? So all of these are properties, right? And given some arbitrary language, right, I can ask this property, right, that I can ask whether or not, okay, is this language regular, or is this language context-free, or is this language infinite, and so on. Okay. So how do we? So we want to develop algorithms, right, to decide this property of languages, right? So we want this algorithm, right, to say that okay, we should take as input a language, and it would figure out whether or not this language has this property or not. Okay. So we will we may have different algorithms for different properties, but that is fine, right? So we will fix a property first. So let's say I take this property p, right, and I want to find out whether or not some arbitrary language has this property or not. Okay. So when we say that this algorithm should take as input the language, right? So I know that languages can be infinite. Okay. So this algorithm, right, cannot take as input something infinite. Right? So it has to take some finite representation of a language, right? And this finite representation of a language is nothing but the machine, right, which is going to accept that language. Right? So languages must be defined by some descriptive device, right? And the most general descriptive device that we know is the Turing machine, right? So that's why we will basically represent a language by its Turing machine, right? So we will say that okay, this algorithm must take as input the language, but the language is infinite. So we will take the Turing machine which defines that language. Right? So which means that this algorithm will take as input a Turing machine. but we know, right, that Turing machines don't define the entire set of languages, right? So there are languages which cannot be defined by Turing machines, right? So therefore we will only consider the properties of recursively enumerable languages, right? Because only recursively enumerable languages, right, can be defined by Turing machines, right? So essentially, right, so we'll develop this. So we want to develop this algorithm which will take as input a recursively enumerable language, right? So in particular, it will take as input the Turing machine of the recursively enumerable language, and then it will determine whether or not this language has this property P or not. Okay. So which means that we can also think of this property, right, as a problem about Turing machines, right? Because we are taking as input a Turing machine. Right? So in particular, we will take as input the binary encoding of the Turing machine, and then we want to decide, right, whether or not the language of this Turing machine has some property, right? So this is basically, so then this becomes a problem about Turing machines. So when I say a problem, right, this means this is a decision problem, right? So its answer is either yes or no. Okay, so for example, all of those instances that I talked about earlier, right, that is some language finite or is some language regular. This will basically become is the language of the input Turing machine finite, or is the language of the input Turing machine regular, right? Or I can also ask, does some binary string belong to the language of the input Turing machine, right? And so on. Right? So all of these are separate properties, right? So this is right. So these are properties like P1, P2, P3, and so on, right? And we want to design algorithms for these properties. Okay. So note though that so there's a subtle distinction here, right? That the property is of the language, right, but not of the Turing machine, right? So even though we want to design this algorithm, right, which takes as input the Turing machine, we are not really interested in the Turing machine itself, right? We're interested in the language that is defined by the Turing machine, because that was our ultimate goal, right? That we want to find out properties of languages, not of the Turing machines. So that's why some of the, so there could be some problems, right, which would say something about the Turing machine itself, right, and not about the language. So for example, right, so these are some other decision problems which are not properties, right, because they only talk about the Turing machine itself, right? So for example, does M halt on all inputs, right? Or does M have at least some 481 states, right? Or does M reject and halt on this particular binary string 001 001, right? So these are all decision problems which are not properties, and the reason they are not properties is because in each of this case above, right, we can give two Turing machines with the same language, where one satisfies the property but the other doesn't satisfy the property, right? But we are only interested in properties of languages, right? So here, right, for each of these decision problems, right, I can give two Turing machines, right, which will both have the same language, right? But only one of the Turing machines will satisfy the property while the other won't satisfy the property. So that means that this is not a property of the language, right? Because since both the Turing machines have the same language, right? So which means that either both of them should satisfy the property, or both should not satisfy the property, right? But here it doesn't happen, right? So for example, if you take the first property, right, which is this does M halt on all inputs, right? So I can, so remember that since there are two criterion, right, for deciding whether or not a string is in the language of the Turing machine, right, which is that either it does not halt or it halts a non-final state. Right? So now I can design two Turing machines, right, which will have the same language, right, which means that on some string X, right, let's say X, right, is not in the language, right, which means that now I can design a Turing machine which will reject that string X, right, by basically halting on it in a non-final state, and I can design another Turing machine which will not halt on that particular input X, right? So this means that I now basically have two Turing machines, right, which both have the same language, but which won't where one of them satisfies this property because it does halt on all inputs, while the other will not halt on one of the inputs, right? But they will define the same language, right? So that's why these are not properties. These are other decision problems related to Turing machines, right? Well, properties are only those decision problems which are related to languages of the Turing machines. Okay. So yeah. So with that, I'm going to end the lecture today, and thank you. So meet tomorrow. Okay. So Vineet is asking that does this mean we can never define languages which are not RE? Yes, that is true. Right? So so there is no finite representation, right, of a language which is not recursively enumerable. I mean, we can define it, right? So in the sense that we can define it mathematically, right? So we define this diagonalization language, which is not recursively enumerable. But you can't have a finite sort of machine representation, right, of this languages which are not RE. So TM is still the most powerful machine we have. Yes, it is, right. So yes, that's correct.
So can we prove something like there will never be a machine which can accept non-recursively enumerable language? Like any kind of machine in future will never be able to do this. Like, is there some kind of proof of this that TM will always be the most powerful representation of a computer?
Well, I mean, so I think so. If we consider this particular computational model, right, uh, where we basically have this memory, right, and you can perform operations. So you can either store and retrieve from the memory, and then you can perform operations. So if you consider this type of computational model, then TM is the most powerful abstraction of this model, right? Uh, but I mean, there may be other computational models, right? I don't know. So yeah, but since we only follow this particular computational model, right? So for this computational model, TM is the most powerful abstraction. In the sense that yeah, you can't design a machine of this particular which performs computation of this form, right? And it accepts some language which is not accepted by a TM.
Hmm. Also, like I sent you a mail regarding the solutions for mid-semester.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I will try to release, but I don't understand what is the advantage of releasing them earlier. I mean, anyway, you can't. I mean, see, after the results are released, right? You can always sort of look at the solution, right? And if you feel that some evaluation is not done correctly, then you can come back and ask the TA, right? So, what's the advantage?
Maybe like because if something is missing in the solution, it
Okay.
might be done wrongly evaluated for all the students.
Okay.
After that, it might be hard to change the evaluation for all the students.
Okay. Okay, I mean, yeah, I mean, this
Like,
hasn't happened so far, but I haven't looked at this example that you gave, right? So maybe I'll just take a look at
okay,
it. Yeah.
yeah, because in this course, like there is no one answer for a problem.
So
A problem in this course, a problem can have many answers.
yeah, yeah, that's
And
true. Yeah, so I mean, I have instructed the I basically instructed the TAs, right, that this solution is basically just a model solution, right? Solution that I give. So it's not like this is the only solution. So there could be other solutions, and I think the TAs have been taking care of this, right? But let's see. I will take a look at this instance that you have given, right? And I mean, there's no problem as such in releasing the
yes,
solution
sir.
earlier. So yeah, I can do that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Bye, sir.